Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. I would like to welcome you from Medical Care Service for Refugees Bochum, a social medical human rights organization and psychosocial treatment center for survivors of torture and war. My name is Bianca Schmolz, and I am responsible for human rights advocacy projects in our organization, focusing on refugees' rights and the rights of survivors of crimes against humanity to truth, justice, and integral reparation. With Medico International and the Institute for the International Law of Peace and Armed Conflict, we have two excellent cooperation partners in which to realize this digital lecture series on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of the UN Refugee Convention. I would also like to thank the Foundation for Environment and Development North Rhine-Westphalia and Rosa Luxemburg Foundation for funding this project. Before we start, let me introduce you my colleague Jan-Philipp Graf from the Institute.
Good afternoon also from my side. My name is Jan-Philipp Graf and I'm a doctoral researcher and research associate at the Institute for International Law of Peace and Armed Conflict associated with Ruhr University in Bochum. On behalf of our research institute and our director, Professor Dr. Pierre Thielberger, I'm happy that we have been invited to co-sponsor and co-host this event. And we would also like to thank our research cooperation partner, the so-called LERRN network. LERRN, that's short for Local Engagement Refugee Research Network, a wonderful research platform created by the University of Carleton and their main mission is to include the voices of refugee researchers, refugees, and civil society organizations from sending countries in refugee research and not make it an affair of the global north. So thank you very much for being here, and thank you very much to Bianca for setting up this interesting and engaging session. Back to you.
Okay, so some technical hints only that you know how to participate in this session. So you can use at any time the Q&A button to ask questions or make comments. After the inputs of our lecturers, we are going to put that into discussion, and we're looking forward to your questions and remarks. Today, we will discuss about development aid and its critical role in the EU approach towards refugees and/or so-called irregular migrants. In our last session, we discussed the EU refugee policy and its plans for an EU pact on refugees that intends to deport as many refugees as possible and to prevent refugees from entering European territory. Next to border controls, illegal pushbacks, and miserable refugee camps at the EU external borders, the EU intensified negotiations with countries in the global south, where the vast majority of refugees live, to realize deals for repatriation, enabling and facilitating deportations of persons that try to seek protection in European member states. It is important to understand that we are experiencing today a paradigm change in regard to development aid, as it turns out to be misused as a tool for migration control. Shortening or extending development aid shall increase the political will of states to keep refugees out of the EU and to make deportations easier. The political situation in these countries is not as relevant as it should be, so that the non-refoulement risks to be violated. Often these deals are made with unstable and authoritarian regimes like Libya, Ethiopia, Niger, Egypt, Mali, and they are often linked with the support for these countries in the fight against terrorism. I'm very happy to have Simone Schlindwein on our panel, as we know each other for a while. Simone is journalist and foreign correspondent for the German newspaper Taz in the Great Lakes region of Africa. Together with her colleague Christian Jakob, she published the book Dictators as Gatekeepers, Outsourcing EU Border Controls to Africa. And they also created the website Migration Control, where they present details about the deals the EU made with states to prevent refugee movement to the EU. For this website, they even received the Otto Brenner Prize for Multimedia Projects. And congratulations for that.
Thank you.
Our second expert comes from our cooperation partner, Medico International. Nina Violetta Schwarz coordinated the project Return Watch, a project that questions the approach of voluntary return that is often presented as an alternative to deportation and key element of the EU Pact on Refugees that was drafted in 2020. Voluntary return programs are part of EU strategy to prevent refugees from being protected in EU member states. Refugees receive money coming from development aid programs for their decision not to apply for asylum, but to leave the European Union, regardless what they experience when they go back to their countries of origin. They had to leave for good reasons. We are going to start with Simone Schlindwein, and she will explain us a little bit her researches she made for the book and the documentary and this website.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me just put here the presentation in full mode. Voila. So as Bianca said, I'm a journalist. I'm currently here in Uganda. That's where I'm based from since about 13 years. And we started the project Migration Control literally in the year 2015. Since then, we had made books, films, research prizes, everything around this issue and this topic. And up to now, we're regularly updating the database about migration control instruments, mechanisms, and response. So I'll lead you a bit through the whole history, how this whole concept and idea of the European Union to control migration with outside her border came to place. So I'm starting with a little bit of a historical background without going too deep into the history of it. Then I should explain you the migration refugee routes of Africa, Europe, which are changing quite sometimes, but from the beginning of the crisis, let's say. I talk about the deals and the negotiations behind closed doors, which we are continuing up to now in many countries. I'm explaining you a bit the migration management agreements, which were signed or not signed and wanted to be signed, but not really getting signed. And shortly talking about readmission agreements, but I think Nina Violetta Schwarz will talk more about that out of her perspective. And I'm going rounding up with the capacity building projects, which led up to a big, huge investment by the defense industry of Europe into African security markets. So the beginning was, of course, everybody knows that 2015, the escalation of the refugee crisis along the Balkan roads. I don't want to go big into the details of it, but at that point, and that November 2015, we were literally, the EU failed to redistribute the refugees within the European Union. Yeah, we had, the basement was the Dublin III agreement, which literally collapsed, and it was clear from that moment on, it's just a piece of paper full of shit, and it does not work. So we did not have, and that is we journalists, we did it very wrong. We talked since then about a refugee crisis in Europe, which was never a refugee crisis. It was, in fact, a crisis of solidarity within the European member states to share this refugee burden among them. And it was a solidarity crisis, period. So, but what the European Union does and did in Brussels, all their people sitting there and thinking, oh my goodness, what is the solution for this? Is to look outside European borders and looking far down into the African continent to find a potential solution, because they realized the Dublin III is just a piece of paper with not a single solution option. So in the same years of 2016, 2015, 16, as the whole thinking in Brussels and in Berlin and in Paris went on what to do, it was embedded in the context of first time European Union was attacked in terms of terror attacks. Yeah, we had Angela Merkel saying, wir schaffen das, but we had, of course, for the wider population of Europe. There was terrorism attacks on the Christmas market in Berlin. There was terrorism in Paris badly. And it was for the European Union, or for the population of Europe, all mixed between crisis of refugees and crisis of security, which then journalists failed to explain that it's actually two different things. But with that security issue, a lot of these questions, what we can do quickly to stop migration because of potential risks of terror, came into a more urgent agenda in Brussels than ever before. And this is where the whole thing went wrong from the beginning. Because among the millions of refugees coming in 2015, there were exactly 180,000, 181,000 Africans. So that was literally a zero number compared to the Syrian, Afghani, and other people coming from other sides of the world. But the European Union calculated what will happen in 10 years, yeah? And then they saw Africa as an explosion of population. And they thought, oh God, imagine they're all standing in front of European doors, yeah, in masses, and especially the young African population. So they predicted some migration numbers in the future, which then escalated the panic, let's say. Then it was the panic button which was pushed in Brussels, which led them to very drastic decisions. At the same time, embedded in this terrorism thing, the European Union started to work on its own defense program. And it was Trump saying clearly, no, we will not defend you Europeans, you have to defend yourself, all that. And then the European Union started to set up its own defense policy, defense agencies, defense action plan, and then did starting to security risk analysis. And the whole security risk analysis of Frontex came into place and was published and said clearly the risk is coming from Africa, pointing to the Sahel region, which was becoming more and more Al-Qaeda terrorism based in Mali and whatever. So there was really much the 1 + 1 is 2 at mathematics in Brussels saying, all right, Africa is the problem, migration from Africa is a European security problem, and we have to stop migration even to the Mediterranean, because we have to literally curb the African migration route. So at that point, 2014-15, the Frontex analytical guys looked at literally African migration routes, drafting this map. You see there are two different roads coming from Africa. One is the west and the one is the east side, yeah? So, and then you see some Mediterranean is crossed in certain points. These points, they change all the time, but the main axis of migration from the west and from the east, they stayed literally the same up to now. So the first idea was to say, okay, we have to cut these migration routes, and we don't let them come even to Europe, to the Mediterranean border because of the Libyan disaster. We cannot go talk to Libya about that, but we need to cut it somewhere else. And then they pointed literally to the Sahara. And that's why the whole idea started to engage first into not with the countries of origin of the migration refugees, but with the countries of transition. And then they pointed straight. We can see here Agadez is a very good hub, like a hub, a crucial hub. Since millions of years, the caravans through the Sahara crossing Agadez, it's the shortest way to cross the Sahara at that level. And of course, Sudan towards Libya or Sudan towards Egypt. These were literally the two countries which they engaged the first. And then, of course, the European Union looked back into their own tools and toolbox of, oh, we had migration control before. So what we did, the European Union already had as instruments in their pockets or in their toolbox, let's say, was the European-Turkey deal. That was a clear deal, money for stopping the refugees to pass, money for closing borders. The European Union gave 5 billion to the Turkey to host and accommodate the refugees on the European behalf. For that, the Turkish government literally closed the borders. Then there was there's another model, which is not a European model, but it works fairly well, the Israeli model. They collect all the mainly Somali, Eritrean, and Ethiopian refugees, which are stranded in Israel. And they literally put them into a plane, hundreds and thousands of them, and had a nice security deal with Rwanda and Uganda saying, we train your intelligence on new technologies and we give you some drones and some surveillance technology. And for each guy we train here in Tel Aviv, you take one refugee as a hosting. So they flew thousands of refugees towards Africa to get agents, security and intelligence agents sent to Israel for training. And there's another model which was done before. It's the Melilla and Ceuta, the Spanish exclaves on the Moroccan side of the Mediterranean, where they literally fenced the whole thing already. So this is European border fences before the whole border technology came in, but it was already there, and it was already giving an example of what a European soon Frontex agency is capable of. So this was literally the toolbox that they had, and they said, okay, let's try these tools and explore them and extend them. So we finally have a functioning fencing border control mechanism. So they invited literally in 2015 November 33 heads of state, all male, except one or two, to Malta. Very symbolic island in the middle of the Mediterranean, and it was as well not all 55 member states of African Union, but only the guys from the Mediterranean to the equator. Because the calculation, the European Union, some guy who I spoke to off record said like, well, further than the equator, these people will not walk to the Mediterranean, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, that was a kind of a funny analysis why only these 33 countries. Uganda was literally the last one down on the equator, which they invited. Oh no, which was not invited, and they were angry about it. Anyway, among these heads of state, there was Sudan's Minister of Foreign Affairs. There was a representative of dictator Isaias Afwerki from Eritrea. Wow, that was the first time these guys were back in the international community and back on the stage, let's say, and they thought, wow, we will give the European Union an occasion to get us back into their international global community. So the decision which was made in Valletta was simple, a called action plan. It was 70 papers, a non-thing of a paper. It was not much set inside, but the Africans promised to jointly fight against irregular migrations, and the European Union promised to set up an emergency fund for Africa with 5 billion. That was the first number of 5 billion, which was mentioned in the global in the negotiations, which then was like already a lot. But of course, it went further and up and up. So the European Union had literally two targets or two goals which they want to reach in the negotiations. The marathon, which then continued after Valletta, was to say, oh, sorry, that is still in German, was to say to reduce the numbers of freshly arriving migrants on the European borders and to increase the numbers of readmission to fly them back home when their asylum process fails. In the focus of these, that's what I said already, in the focus of these negotiations, make a hierarchy, what is the most important country we need to engage with? And then they said, okay, on the western transit route, it's Mali and Niger, and on the eastern transit route, it's Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt. And with Libya, we can literally not deal with it because they don't have a proper functioning government. But what was then the whole thing about it? Angela Merkel literally started the plane and flew from Mali to Niger to Ethiopia. So that was not at all a coincidence that she literally went ahead of all European heads of state and literally handshaked all these guys to say, we need an agreement, and now. The interesting case is always Niger, because it's so obvious. It's the best case you can just retell, and everybody thinks, wow, what a story. But Niger, she met the president there, and before Niger was a non-country to the European Union and Germany, then received not even a 250 million development aid in a year and some funny education programs. But then Angela Merkel met with the heads of state of Niger, and he said, "Okay, I stop all the migration through Agadez, no problem. But I want this, this, and this, and half a billion of development aid." And of course, in Germany, everybody is like, half a billion. But later, 1 year later, he was having received $1 billion already. And now I think we are at 1.6. But for that, Agadez was literally closed. And it was very easy deal. We deal with State House directly, not much parliaments involved. And the Germans sent their army to Niger to train the French as well, and Frontex sent their guys and everyone. So it was nicely arranged with a government which was never engaged with before. So these agreements have literally 1 million different pages. We thought we'd go through all of them. I have to admit, after 25 agreements I've read, I was tired, because it is a nonsense of paperwork, but all is called differently, but all literally has the same aim: stop migration, but it's called differently. It's Agenda for Migration Africa, European Partnership, Marshall Plan, and billion of pages were printed with literally the same again. And what was interesting, we get at one point the so-called strategy papers leaked from the European Commission. And what they say was, well, these strategy papers were really clearly visualizing what the European Union wants. First, there was like our interests, the interests of the country, and the overlapping negotiations we can do. Yeah, this is how they strategize, is literally country by country, this agreement to lure the guys into some signing. And most important is the Rabat and Khartoum process. If you remember the two migration roads, the west and the east. So the Rabat process gets all the Western African countries together, and the Khartoum process, all the Eastern side African countries together for joint border security capacity building programs, which is more or less a training project for the border units of these countries. So here, for these agreements to be signed, the European Union offered for each country a huge package of development aid. Is it for some vocational training schools or other things to keep people at home? And so the money started little and then went increased by billions rapidly over the years and months. So before 2015, whole Africa got in the whole trust for 2 billion in total for 5 years. Then the emergency trust for 2015 was set up, and it was already 5 billion in that pocket this year for 5 years. But then the European Development Fund was set up a year later with 30 billion. Then the Instrument for Neighborhood Development was set up, almost 80 billion. Then the Integrated Border Management Fund came 16 billion. And at the end of the day, we thought like, wow, from 2 to where are we going? Here is like skyrocketing of money invested. But then what are the Africans want? They only want legal migration to Africa, to Europe. And then look what the European Union promised for them, 54 million for a legal entry option. It was literally a package where the African Union said, European Union, thanks so much, we're going to China. Because our agenda is not fitting into what you guys want, it's not fitting what we guys want. Yeah, the tendency, which this is a website from our, a graphic from our website, which was in German, unfortunately. But yeah, which we figured out that the aid goes targeted into countries where the European want to stop migration, meaning in these transit countries, like Ethiopia, Niger, Mali, Sudan, which never got a single coin before because of oil sanction of the regime, suddenly get money, 100, 200 million in the beginning, just there. But so the European Union is literally having an agenda not to invest their development aid into poor countries, yeah, or democratic countries where freedom rights are respected by the regime and all that. No, they're thinking the priority is now the money goes into these countries which are willing to work as gatekeepers or bouncers for us. We will literally give them an award instead of the poor ones which really needed it. So the development aid was suddenly all about combating root causes of migration, security, training security agencies, migration management instruments, and it was literally sanctioned when you don't want to be in this agenda as an African country. You don't have any chance to get much more higher development aid if you don't stop migration. And it was suddenly militarized. It means that a lot of these development aid ministries in Berlin, about Paris and all these other European countries suddenly work together with the defense industry or defense ministries in their migration development projects. And it does not go longer to the poorest countries, and it does suddenly go to isolated states with Sudan and Eritrea. We didn't receive a single coin before as a sanction. But as well, this aid, when it goes to countries who stop migration, this money is not increased. It's lacking somewhere else, meaning there's another school which is not built because somewhere else the migration fence or border unit is equipped. But now, of course, these countries which were the first to be willing to work for Europe, where Sudan and Eritrea, they made a really quick move straight away next to Niger. And Sudan was at that time still President al-Bashir in power, but the right now current heads of Sudan state, General Daglo, was at that point the chief of the border unit. And he said clearly in a press conference in 2016, and he had an ICC arrest warrant on his head, was saying, it's very clear we are not affected by the refugees because these people, they want to go to Europe. So we are working for Europe. And this is the guy with the ICC arrest warrant on his head. So I think sometimes the European Union literally put all their own ideas on values into the bin to get this thing done. The same with the case Eritrea. Germans were very leading on that to get Afwerki back into the carousel of guys collaborating with the European Union. And they promised Eritrea a lot of vocational training centers to keep the boys at home. Why at home? It's a torture prison. So winners of all this in first round of negotiations were literally, Eritrea, Sudan, and other more authoritarian regimes. We were willing to literally ignore the interests of their own country or their own population, but to work for Europe for their own benefits. The losers of this agenda was, for example, Uganda, where I stay, because at that moment, at this time of crisis, Uganda had a refugee crisis coming from Congo and Sudan, and we had been at one point hosting 1.4 million refugees. Imagine for a country which is poor like itself. So, and Uganda was expecting more development aid from the European Union to host these countries, to set up new settlements, water, sanitation, to host like education programs in the refugee camps. But the money didn't come to Uganda because the European Union said like, oh, you guys, the refugees are in Uganda very nicely hosted, but it's too far to walk to Europe, so you are not on our agenda. And that was really directly communicated to the Ugandan government. The Ugandan Minister of Refugee Affairs was pissed, literally. This was at that point the largest refugee camp in Africa, and one apart from the Rohingya camps, literally the biggest in the world. And Uganda got hardly any increase of money from the European Union at that point because the European Union started to invest in other countries. So the Europeans' dilemma was at that point that a lot of these countries at the end figured out, what the European Union wants from us is going far over the border of our own interests. So they did literally negotiated with them, but never signed the whole agreement. So the European Union still up to now is stuck in their dilemma that deportations, or how we all call it, readmission, nicely framed, is still not taking place as much as the European Union wants. It's still highly cost intensive. Then the lack of passports, a lot of migrants, refugees end up with no passport in the European Union. So the European Union has a problem to send them back. When they say I'm Nigerian, yet they're Somalis, then they have a problem even to get a document for them. So there are a lot of African countries that literally said, okay, that is not in our interest. We are not signing this. For example, one good case was Mali. Mali in 2017, as I remember right, the president of Mali was in Brussels. And in Brussels, there was a big press conference saying that he signed the agreement. And then he flew home, and he in Bamako, as he landed with this plane, he was received with really angry protesters. And there he gave a press conference that I did not sign. Of course, he signed, but he annulled literally the agreement because he faced literally the democratic demonstration back home. So what is as well the case of Mali, for example, that a lot of these migrants, yeah, they just work outside or work in the European Union or work even at the other countries in Africa. They're sending a lot of money back home to their families. It's even more than development aid ever goes to Mali. So in our project, and that is why I put this graphic, was that you see the yellow thing is the development aid which goes to these countries, and the gray part is the money which is sent by the diaspora back home. So for many African countries, the diaspora as a money earning factor for the home population is more important than the development aid from European Union. And that's why a lot of these countries did not sign the agreement. As long as they are democratic enough, they don't sign these things. So losers are literally the Africans themselves, which don't get much money from, let's say, my auntie in Europe, yeah. And the results of the negotiations up to now are most of the countries, except of Ethiopia, never signed the agreement. The Mali case, let's forgive him for the signature he did mistakenly. The readmission is still a very big program because no country wants the readmission to be happening. And the solution of the European Union, which they thought like, okay, if this does not work, then let's do the other thing. It's more expensive and more cost intensive, but it's maybe the only way how we gonna stop this migration. Was the biometric solution approach they finally targeted. So what that means, my last little bit of paragraph about it, it's a bit complex, but I give you a lot of sheets to explain what I mean with border management and biometrics. So it's called migration management in the European papers. What is meant by that is this: what we Europeans know, this fingerprint kind of thing on the border controls. Yeah, but before you have to realize in 2015, an African border looks like that. I mean, there is not even a fence, there is not even a computer, there is maybe not even electricity. And there is a book which people sign in their passport number with a stilo, with a pen. But this is what the European Union faced as they looked at African borders. Thought, oh my goodness, no surprise, everybody can just roam around in this continent and reach the Mediterranean at one point. So we have to set up proper borders in Africa. And how borders in Africa mean, we Germans know that because it was the first African borders were drawn in the Berlin Conference 1868. Means this is what we Germans or Europeans think is a border control station, like unit or point, yeah? Computers, face recognition, fingerprints, all this, and it needs to be a biometric passport. But of course, you need computers, you need a database, you need everything on that border control electrified, you need Wi-Fi, you need an electricity cable to be working 24 hours. So this is literally the expensive version of migration control. It looks like that. And that's what we call Schengen for us and fences for Africa. The European defense sector, which at that time looked into security, how to establish security in Europe and all that, came up with a big fund, which was financed by the European Union Commission to develop sophisticated border units, including training of border units in terms of patrols, but as well dogs, you know, like parameterization, but as well the fences and the surveillance cameras and all that stuff which is there. This is how a European designed border by Rheinmetall, the German leading defense thing, plus Airbus, air defense of European Union, and is planning these border things. This is how it meant to look like in Africa, so that people don't cross. And this is how in Koita and Melilla looked already. But it is a lot of high sophisticated small little cameras and all that, which is produced singularly in Europe. So as well as satellite surveillance. So right now, the biggest satellite farm was literally set up. It's 380 million, I think, for satellites over the Mediterranean, but as well the Sahel zone. Agadez has now a European Frontex satellite straight positioned over Agadez, which can literally zoom down on the floor, on the ground, and see the tire traces, like cars passing through the desert. And they're calling literally from Frontex analytical units, they're calling the French or the German military on the ground saying, there was a car crossing an hour ago, you go and find them. This is how sophisticated it is in the meantime already, that they can live see cars crossing the Sahara. And this is how Frontex looked like these days. I mean, and Frontex was at one point, 2015, an agency with like about 300 something personnel, 336, and is now an agency with a personnel number of 1,500. The same is the budget skyrocketed from 142 million to 1.5 billion. And of course, Frontex had a total new law agreement or legal agreement to be much more functional, even outside European borders. In the meantime, they have literally in all the main countries in Africa, at least one guy stationed, deployed permanently in the border units of the African country to train and advise them. What's happening as well with Frontex, set up the Africa Frontex Intelligence Community, which is, let's say, the club of heads of intelligence. Yeah, they meet in Warsaw once a year, maybe twice. All heads of intelligence of Africa, 33 countries come together and share their information. But as well, all these guys and all these intelligence units, mostly it's under the military intelligence here in Africa, the border control unit. By the way, the same military intelligence which tortures the shit out of freedom fighters, human rights activists, journalists, and so on. But these guys get like a software plus computers and everything from the European Frontex agency to set up literally a software where they type in their migration data, passport here and there, this guy crossed this and this border at this and this point or time. And this information is straight channeled online to Frontex, meaning when I go to the neighboring country tomorrow morning, Frontex in Warsaw can at least one point see that I crossed Rwandan-Ugandan border. Meaning the Frontex in Warsaw knows already, before you guys even reach European Union or the Mediterranean border, who is walking which way. And that's literally what was the Europeans' idea, but that was, of course, the costly approach how to get that thing done. So, winners
Simona, could you come to an end in about 5 minutes?
That's my last page. The winners are literally the European defense and intelligence sectors, which have a lot of small material from the biometric fingerprinting machine to the big defense fencings exported now to Africa. And of course, the losers are the Africans themselves, not only the migrants and the refugees, but as well a lot of people who just travel forth and back for work or private reasons within the African continent, which should have a visa-free agreement because the African Union wants that visa-free continent. But the European agenda is undermining their African Union agenda. So one last thing, which I want to give you as a quote on the end of my speech is Vincent Cochetel. He is the special envoy of the UNHCR to the Mediterranean and Libya, which gave us an interview several times, but he repeats again and again the saying that we assume that there are twice as many people dead in Africa on their way to the Mediterranean than in the Mediterranean themselves, due to the European migration policy, and probably even more. And the numbers are rising, but nobody has the figures anymore. So for further information, please visit our website in migrationcontrol.info. Our book is here available in English and in German, Dictators as Gatekeepers of Europe. And our movie, our documentary movie, is available in 3 languages as well on YouTube. Go and have a look for it. It's called Türsteher Europas or Dictators as Gatekeepers of Europe. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Simone, for this overview, shocking overview. So
here in Uganda, I'm sorry, I have to switch on the light.
No problem. Thank you so much, Simone. So we continue with Nina, who's going to present us a different aspect of the same topic. And Nina, I hand over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation. I hope you can hear me well, and for the warm welcome. Thank you also, Simone, that you gave this really comprehensive overview, because now I am very lucky that I can go more into detail on a specific, let's say, technology within this border regime, which is also in a big part paid and financed by development aid money. So my name is Nina. I am project coordinator on migration in the Middle East at Medicos, and as Bianca said, I coordinated the Return Watch project. This is a research and documentation project. And with this, we problematize assisted voluntary return. Many people agree on voluntary return because they don't have any alternatives, and often they are really desperate. So with the Return Watch project, we show the use of development aid for migration management using a concrete example, voluntary return, and this is very important, reintegration programs. So this goes together. We have in Germany and Europe the voluntary return programs. There it starts, and then it ends up in the countries of origin in reintegration programs. And we will talk about this, and I will talk about this now, and we will discuss this hopefully later. Our website is published in 3 languages, in German, in English, and in French, and you can find it at return-watch.org. And now I would like to start with a short video clip reproduced for Return Watch to come closer to the topic of my input. I think it's a good overview. It is in German, but dubbed in English with subtitles in English. So I will share my screen now with you. 1 minute. Up. And start the very short clip.
Während des langen Sommers der Migration überwanden tausende Menschen die Grenzen der Festung Europa. Es dauerte nicht lange, da reagierten europäische Regierungen auf Druck von rechts mit Abwehrmaßnahmen. Ihr Ziel, die Zahl der ankommenden Menschen zu senken. Die neue Zauberformel dafür: Rückführung und Fluchtursachenbekämpfung. Die Verhältnisse zu überwinden, die Menschen weltweit zur Flucht zwingen, ist mit Fluchtursachenbekämpfung aber nicht immer gemeint. Vielmehr ermöglicht das neue Label der EU, Mittel für Entwicklungszusammenarbeit oder wirtschaftliche Investitionen an Länder fließen zu lassen, die bereit sind, die Fluchtrouten nach Europa zu blockieren. Neben Armutsbekämpfung oder Bildung wird Entwicklungshilfe so auch für die Ausbildung von Polizei und Armeen in diktatorischen Regimen verwendet. Dieser Interpretation von Fluchtursachenbekämpfung folgen auch die Programme zur freiwilligen Rückkehr und Reintegration in Deutschland. Sie legen Schutzsuchenden bereits bei ihrer Ankunft in Europa die Rückkehr in ihr Herkunftsland nahe. Für eine frühzeitige Ausreise werden Extraboni versprochen, die Übernahme von Wohnkosten oder Hilfe bei der Arbeitssuche im Herkunftsland. Als Gegenleistung müssen die Menschen auf ihren Schutzstatus, ein Asylverfahren und weitere Rechtsmittel verzichten. Vielen Geflüchteten in Deutschland fehlt es an rechtlichem Beistand und Perspektiven im Asylverfahren. Das liegt auch daran, dass den unabhängigen Aufenthaltsberatungen massiv die Mittel gekürzt wurden. Übrig bleibt oft nur die einseitige Beratung durch die Rückkehrprogramme. Viele Menschen fühlen sich dadurch unter Druck gesetzt. Ausweglosigkeit und Verzweiflung oder auch die Angst vor einer brutalen Abschiebung sind dann oft Gründe, sich auf eine freiwillige Rückkehr einzulassen. Für die, die zurückkehren, ist die politische und wirtschaftliche Situation meist schwierig, manchmal sogar lebensbedrohlich. Die schön klingenden Versprechen der Bundesregierung werden oft nicht eingehalten. Oder die Mittel reichen nicht aus, um ein menschenwürdiges und sicheres Leben aufzubauen. Viele bereuen ihre Entscheidung zur Rückkehr. Einige sehen sich erneut zur Flucht gezwungen. Mit ihrem Rückkehrprogramm versucht die Bundesregierung, das Recht auf Asyl auch den Menschen abzukaufen, die eigentlich gute Anerkennungschancen haben oder aus Ländern kommen, in die nicht abgeschoben werden darf. Und jede freiwillige Rückkehr dient ihr als Argument für die vermeintliche Sicherheit des jeweiligen Landes. Dadurch können Abschiebungen auch in unsichere Länder legitimiert werden. Wir meinen, freiwillig geht anders und Fluchtursachenbekämpfung auch.
Okay. Okay, so I hope this gave you a short idea about the topic of my input. With this research project, we looked at this promotion and the funding of return and reintegration. And together with other experts, we discussed the context and this is important, and we also learned this from Simone's talk, this trend toward return and return assistance. We focused mostly on German practices and policies, but this is an example for also the European approach, and we can today also talk about the European level, of course.
Nina, can you stop the screen sharing so that we can see you speaking, or do you need it?
Yes, I would like to show some things after, but we can share in between, of course. Yeah.
Thank you.
So let me say some short sentences about the project, and then I would talk in general about development aid and the return policies. And later on, I would like to focus with you on the individual cases of returnees. So what all this means actually for people who return to their countries of origin. At the heart of our page, there are these experiences of returnees from Morocco, Afghanistan, Iraq, from Northern Iraq, from Nigeria and Mali. And this, just to say it beforehand, make it very clear that the people often do not make use of voluntary return and reintegration programs of their own free will. but of course rather out of necessity and for the lack of alternatives. Many returnees end up in hopeless and really difficult situations in their country of origin. The interviews with them showed us that a decision of return with the help of official programs usually has little to do with voluntariness. Like returnees leave because they cannot bear the uncertainty of the situation in Germany or in Europe, or because no one shows them any alternatives. We will look at this later. I would like to say some words on the motivation why we set up the Return Watch at Medicos. We decided to focus more intense on return and reintegration because, as already mentioned, Simone made this very clear. We have a trend also since 2015, before as well, but since 2015, the signs in Germany and Europe are increasingly on defense and return of refugee and migrants. And this is also expressed in different interministerial approaches. So this means, like for Germany, but also on a European level, that the objective, the interest is somehow matched. So for Germany, it's the Interior Ministry working together with the Ministry of Development Cooperation, for example, when it comes to voluntary return and reintegration programs. So this is a new marriage, like let's say, with a very clear interest. This is one of the major points for us. Of course, it has been long the case that development aid is also used for migration management. This is nothing new, but like the extent is new, I would say. And how it is involved into promote voluntary return and reintegration. Like it's, this is really something we experience as a very new development. And we wanted to take a closer look at this as an organization that is always active in the field of development aid and critically accompanies also the border closure policy of the European Union and also of Germany. This transient approach is also reflected in the Asylum and Migration Pact, in the Commission strategy for voluntary return and reintegration. We can talk about this a bit later. Another important point is the input which came also from our partner organization. We have partner organizations worldwide, and we have been working for many years with deportees self-organizations in West Africa. So with deportees who have come to support each other and help newly deported people upon their arrival. And these organizations were increasingly confronted with voluntary returnees whose situation was virtually no different from the deportees. They were just as bad off. This was later confirmed also by our partners in Afghanistan, where also voluntary returnees are just as much in danger as deportees because they are considered westernized, or it's suspected that they have context in the West through that they also are there and that they provide maybe money or other stuff brought from Europe. If you want to check on this, Friederike Stahlmann has done a lot of research on this, and we worked with her also together on this topic. Our partners, the partners from Afghanistan, even went so far to say that voluntary returned people are worse off than deportees because they agreed to their return. So under whatever pressure, and this we will talk later, but they agreed on this officially. So therefore they feel that they blame themselves for this, for their own misery. And also they are blamed by others from their family members, for example. I would like to share the screen if it's not annoying so that you can have an idea of our structure. of the website, and then I will continue talking, both at the same time. I'm very bad. So we have these three categories: context, portraits, and countries. And I think everything what is about development aid and the financial part, you can find here also in the first articles. This is by me and my colleague Ramona Lenz, who also coordinated this project with me. I will leave this open for a second. I would like also to go one step back, and this is also explained on our website. So what is voluntary return? How this is connected to reintegration programs, and why we talk about this in the context of development aid. We touched this in the video, and I touched this a bit now in my talk, but briefly, like voluntary return officially is a form of return assistance designed to help people return to their country, right? So there are return programs of the European Union, not only of Germany, and there are individual programs like from member states. Then various return and reintegration programs are designed to provide financial support, but also to organize a return or to organize the arrival. It should give a good to head with the start in the country again. It's covering travel costs, paying a startup grant or some rent also. This is then coupled, and this is the important point, to reintegration programs. So travel costs, but also rent, maybe furniture for the house, or ideas how to set up an economic, economical perspective in the country of origin. The target group, and this is also a really important point, is primarily people officially whose asylum application has been rejected, but also, and this is what we found out in our research, during asylum procedure, directly after the arrival of people are asked to use voluntary return programs directly to go back to their country. And this is what we call like selling your right of asylum, because you sell your right of asylum when you sign the option of returning so-called voluntarily. And this can be very dangerous when you are in an insecure situation, arriving in a new country, and you are not sure what to do. You are convinced to return. Is not, I think, how people should be welcomed in Europe. So officially, the return assistance programs are intended to increase the number of departures and contribute to the reintegration of returnees in their countries of origin. This is EU state, but also German opinion, let's say, or objective. Also, just to add this, because we are not focusing so much on this on our website, but voluntary return programs are also set up in third countries, of course, in Morocco, Tunisia, in different countries to, and it is then used or used for people who go back in their countries of origin, like Cameroon, Ivory Coast, or something like this. So transit migrants can also use it in third countries. Just so that you see more of this website, we have here a lot of positions. Here, when it comes to all what I'm just now talking about, Valentin Feneberg gave a great overview about this part. So programs to promote voluntary return and reintegration are not something new, as we said. They exist in all member states. Interesting is that the International Organization of Migration, IOM, somehow is the founder of this assisted voluntary return. The IOM implements return programs in EU member states, but also outside the EU, as mentioned before. Since 2015, however, the political goal of sealing of Europe had been tightened, and both at the EU level and in the member states, and much has been done to encourage people to return to their countries of origin. Yeah, let me just show you up our start page, and then we can also come back to the full screen of our videos, if you like. Okay. Sorry, now I lost myself here. So what is important, and also in the previous input was touched, the fighting the cause of flight has become a magic word in development cooperation since 2015. And all this trend to close the borders, fighting the causes of flight is somehow a buzzword. And it includes not only long-term economic and development investment in countries of origin, transit or host countries, but also border protection measures and the promotion of return and reintegration. Development cooperation focuses on countries from which relatively large numbers of people are making their way to Europe, as it was described already. And it places itself at the service of domestic, of inner policy and migration defense, while at the same time contributing to the expansion of the EU border regime. However, as I just read, the number of returnees is still too low for the EU. And it therefore, like the EU, wants to increase the effectiveness of the measures by introducing a common EU return system with greater involvement of the Border Management Agency of Frontex. We heard about Frontex before in the input, and I think it's very important to mention here that also Frontex mandate is expanding now, and so that the agency no longer only turns people back at the border and ensures deportation, but also advises on voluntary return and implements it directly. So Frontex is involved now, or it is planned that Frontex will be involved in voluntary return programs and reintegration as well. So during our project, we learned, instead of listening to the stories of refugees and carefully processing their asylum applications, in Europe, they are increasingly being extended the questionable offer to leave voluntarily. Often this is done via the asylum process, as I said, and even directly after the arrival. Even before, it was just EU, in a paper of the EU, it were I quote, at the earliest possible stage of the migration process. So this is really unbelievable that it is even written in this paper. So where is the right to asylum? And it is, and there is the good reason, or the reason to understand at least, it is a money issue. Supporting a so-called voluntary return is much more cheaper than a deportation. So the sooner someone leaves, the more money can be saved. I would like to jump with you to another very short clip so that we can talk about the effect on the people who are concerned with this. Let's watch our introduction video here. Hope you can see it. Let's watch it together, and then we can talk about some cases before going to the discussion.
Direkt nachdem ich meinen Antrag auf Asyl eingereicht habe, wurden mir die Unterlagen für das freiwillige Rückkehrprogramm in die Hand gedrückt. Warum ich fliehen musste, hat niemanden wirklich interessiert.
Als unser Asylantrag abgelehnt wurde, war das ein Schock. Die Ausländerbehörde hat uns gedrängt, möglichst schnell auszureisen. Dass wir gegen den Ablehnungsbescheid hätten Einspruch erheben können, wussten wir nicht. Und auch nicht, dass wir damit gute Chancen gehabt hätten. Unsere Angst vor einer gewaltvollen Abschiebung in der Nacht war groß, vor allem wegen unserer kleinen Tochter. Deswegen haben wir uns entschieden, lieber zu gehen. Ich habe mich über Jahre bemüht, eine Arbeitserlaubnis zu bekommen oder einen Platz in einem Deutschkurs. Immer vergeblich. Die Welt wurde jeden Tag düsterer. Ich war zum Schluss total erschöpft und konnte kaum mehr klar denken. Wenn du so isoliert bist, die Sprache nicht kennst und rassistisch beleidigt wirst, da willst du nur noch weg und stimmst zu. Das fühlt sich an wie eine Abschiebung, nur ohne dass man offiziell gezwungen wurde. Als ich hier ankam, wusste ich sofort, das war ein Fehler. Meine Eltern sind aus diesem Land geflohen, bevor ich geboren wurde. Ich bin jetzt zum ersten Mal hier und kenne niemanden. Damit ich einwillige, wurde mir Hilfe bei der Existenzgründung versprochen. Vor der Abreise bekam ich etwas Geld. Das war schnell aufgebraucht. Von den weiteren Versprechen des Rückkehr- und Reintegrationsprogramms wurden viele nicht eingehalten. Auf Anraten des Reintegrationsprogramms habe ich einen Friseursalon aufgemacht. Es gibt aber schon genug Friseure in der Stadt und die Leute sind sehr arm. Ich kann oft nicht mal die Miete für den Laden aufbringen. Wir trauen uns nicht aus dem Haus. Die Gruppe, wegen deren Todesdrohungen wir fliehen mussten, ist ja nicht verschwunden. Und es gibt keine Sicherheitsbehörden, die uns und unsere Kinder schützen.
Okay, so we have maybe now impression what is the situation for people returning. We asked the people like what is the motivation to leave, why they decide to this and how they end up. You find all this results on our website. Most of the people we talk to, they leave out of desperation because of false promises or because they are under a huge pressure. People also, they return because they suffer from racism, from exclusion, from a restrictive conditions of the asylum system, and they just lose all their hope. The pressure to return increases the feeling of powerless and helplessness. So also people told me that they cannot trust in any counseling center anymore because they always think that they the motivation is to convince them to leave. And also, to quote one person, he said, "Should I wait until I'm torn out of my sleep into the morning with the children and being deported, or should I leave myself?" Quote ends. So people can no longer stand the pressure, and they want also to protect their children from violent deportation and maybe also a renewed traumatization. This conversation with refugees show that a decision to return with the help of official programs usually has really, really little to do with voluntariness. In fact, and this becomes very clear within our research, successful reintegration is only achieved in very, very small numbers of cases. And in the end of a long journey, unfortunately, the returnees are often worse off than before. What we often have been told is that the promised benefits have not been paid. For example, returnees from Morocco told us that they have asked for the second installment. Normally that's a first and a second one. And they have been put off again and again, and until today they never received it. Also, the reintegration programs are supposed to support and accompany people in general, but this is not always taking place. Even on a psychological level, let's say, this is promised a lot in the case of Afghanistan before Taliban took over. Also, what we saw in the video with the barber shop, money is often not connected to the real needs of the person or of the individual. Sometimes it's just not done at all, and sometimes they cannot contact anyone when they are back.
Nina, our time is running out.
Yeah.
Can you stop in some seconds?
Yes, I would like to I will then cut my conclusion. This is fine, but I want to name a very brutal case we documented, so not to go over. This is my last sentence. So how brutal and irresponsible this voluntary return shows a case from Afghanistan, from Adnan and Amira. You can find it on our page. They were in Germany. Their case, like that, their story of persecution was not believed by German competent authorities. The asylum application was rejected, and they went back because they were so desperate and afraid. 1 year later, Adnan, the husband, was murdered by a Taliban group, and this was the reason why they left Afghanistan. So just to give you also an impression how brutal this kind of voluntariness can be. Yeah, I'm here for questions and also closing words maybe then in the very end. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nina. I think that you gave a good impression about your project, and I invite you all to visit this website and to look at the portraits they present there and the stories behind, because this is what we need to put in the focus: the human beings, the refugees, and their stories and their experiences, and not be ignorant like the EU and its institutions and policymakers. So I would like to use these last minutes for giving you some comments and questions from the audience. So I would start by reading it without your names, because of data protection, I will not read the names of the persons that wrote it. So I will start with a comment or a question. So we all know that we will be facing more serious problems and immigration crisis because of the climate change too. Do we have any future plans to solve ecological immigrants problem? If yes, what are they? Sorry, but I want to skip this question. We discussed that in our previous sessions that you can watch on YouTube. So please forgive me that I will not bring that one into discussion. So the next one would be, can development aid stop migration? Those who receive this development aid, are they using this money to development programs for poor people who are affected by the illegal migration? So perhaps you can clarify this a little bit, Simone and Nina. Shall I repeat? Your micro. Simone, your mic is off.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so can development aid stop migration? Those who receive this development aid, are they using this money to development programs for poor people who are affected by illegal migration?
Yeah, okay.
I assume not, but what do you say about that?
I think Simone wants to start.
Yeah, out of my perspective, it is literally not possible. I mean, we have so many thousands of projects of vocational training to get guys jobs so they don't move and migrate, but as well, a refugee is a refugee because not of a lack of job at home. So that's the first point, yeah. These conflicts and solutions of violent conflicts and dictatorships are not solved via development aid or migration control money. The other things, which is the more terrible outcome of this policy right now, which we're seeing in after 5, 6, 7 years now, is that the traffickers who literally make money out of trafficking people to the European borders were so sophisticated that they're circumcised all the European countries, which are all the African countries which are engaged in the European border control mechanism or migration control mechanism, and said, all right, if you guys set up fences and we can't cross the Mediterranean anymore, then we got just more expensive but more sophisticated transit routes. And right now, 2 years ago, I researched Eritrean migrants or refugees who traveled literally from via Uganda, that to Malaysia, to South Asia, then flew from there to Uruguay to join the trek coming from South America to the US border via Mexico. Meaning the refugees and migrants will find their way. The question is, how much does it cost? And the European border or the migration control approach just made the efforts more horrendous and the costs more skyrocketing. But traffickers are there, refugees and migrants are there, and the roads are just becoming more and more crazy.
Nina, you want to add something?
I think I would say I totally agree. Like routes are getting more and more dangerous, of course. And beside this very extreme example, what you just gave, still we can see like when there's no way anymore in the north of Morocco, then people are going to a more deadly route where the Canary Islands or to Libya, or taking even boats from Lebanon to Cyprus or from Lebanon to Italy, being then on their way pushed again to Turkey, held in detention in Turkey. So I mean, development aid, migration control will never stop migration. Migration existed and will exist and find their ways, but more deadly and much more dangerous. So I totally agree.
The next comment is also supporting this, I think. So nice presentation, few comments. First, migration is part of human life and should be considered as human right. While EU entrenches borderization through the narratives of migration crisis that did not exist in its territory, unfortunately, EU continues to remove border barriers in its terror. Second, we should talk about migrants from two viewpoints. Europeans too remit to Europe from Africa, just as Africans do to their homelands. What do you think of the broader impacts of the expansion of border control to Africa? How do this affect, how is the new territory and spatial politics affect for refugee-like situation within and across Africa? If it was too quick, you can also see the point under the F&A button, so then you can reach it.
Really, I don't understand the question right. I'm maybe too tired, but I'm not really getting the question right. What's the point of it?
So I will try again. So we should
talk.
I
can read it, but I don't know what is he focusing on.
Okay, so what do you know?
And skip this, let's say.
I think he's talking, I think the question is about this tendency of externalization of asylum procedures and border controls. So that so what we discussed, it's like a Eurocentric neo-colonial approach towards the African continent. So
yeah, I think he is also
behind that.
He is really like the question is focusing really, Simona, on your points, I guess, on like how this externalization of Europe is also making movements within Africa much more difficult. If I get it right.
Yeah. So there is this focus. point, for example, like the example is the ECOWAS. It is on the West African side, literally a copy paste of the European Union. In the East Africa, we have that as well, but it's not that much affected by it. But the ECOWAS has itself a freedom of movement kind of paragraph among member states that with just a local national ID card, they can travel to the neighboring ECOWAS countries for free without visa. Work as well, labor is allowed, like labor permits are not required anymore. So meaning the European Union's approach to migration control literally undermines the ECOWAS Freedom of Movement Act strictly. And for example, the last question in this comments, then I can just get that in because it targets the same direction of the example of Niger. So imagine you are like a person from Mali or Burkina Faso and you're traveling to Niger. You can be literally hunted down for illegal migration at one point because Niger changed their law, their laws on migration. So illegal migration is really hunted in the terms of penalty code. And the traffickers itself are really highly targeted on really high crime fees, but as well illegal migration, you can be detained. If you find yourself as a migrant on the way to Agadez, you just go there for business because Agadez is a trading point, yeah? But you can be risking an arrest for illegal migration. And that is undermining African laws. Yeah, it is a very neo-colonial approach.
Thank you. Thank you. So the person also wrote a study on, just to tell you and to give, so I can tell you the name of the person right now, but as you can see in the Q&A here also, this person also wrote a study for the Lake Chad Basin region. So perhaps for you, Simone, that could be also quite interesting. There's another question for you, Simone. Under international law, people have the right to exit any country, including their own. Where people are already present in transit countries, such as Niger, what is the legal basis for preventing them from exiting in order to reach the EU? Is it anti-smuggling trafficking laws, a prohibition? Sorry?
Yeah, and the Niger changed the law 2015-16. They amended their penalty code, and they literally copied the European textbook of what the European Union wanted to make illegal migration not legal. I mean, like illegalize migration itself, and put high penalties on traffickers and people who get involved in traffic business. Yeah, so if you get on a truck and pay that guy a fee to get, so you're committing already a crime. Well, through the desert, I'm sorry, but this is just normal taxi guys. Yeah, I mean, what literally, as we went with the film crew to Agadez, all the taxi drivers were literally arrested because for them it's just normal taxi things. From Agadez, the Libyan border is a taxi road. Yeah. But of course, it was used from traffickers and migrants, and then became totally illegal.
Oh my God! I hope that's answering the last question that came in. So, what does illegal migration mean in that context? Okay, so then I would myself have a question to you. Because when I hear all that, so this approach to have development aid for migration control, so I really ask myself, what are the reactions by big NGOs that are responsible for to implement development aid projects? Are there any protests? Because, sorry, I did not get so much criticism so far in the public space. So. Please tell me how was the reaction by the NGOs in the civil society sector, and how do we come back to a development aid that is really focusing on improving living conditions of human beings? So how do we get back to that?
I think Nina will talk a bit better about the NGO sector, which was discussed highly at that point among the NGO sector. But what I figured out, or what we figured out, we were like a lot engaging the GIZ, the German Development Agency, because it was the main literally agency which got a contract from the European Commission to implement all these stuff. yeah, next to IOM, but like GIZ got like a woolly lion's share of that. So among the GIZ staff, it was highly discussed, questioned, and criticized. A lot of these people said we don't want to work with defense ministry or internal ministries in terms of security. We don't want to engage with intelligence people of Africa. I'm sorry, these people are criminals and they torture human rights activists. So, but the GIZ literally within they discussed that among people, but the criticism and the discussion was not mentioned to the outside world. And a lot of people who did not agree with it were not hired again for these projects. Some projects hired consultants from outside and not even GIZ people inside.
Simone, Nina, to you also the question, because as we know, here in the European Union, there are a lot of NGOs that are doing projects of voluntary return. So what do you think about that? So why is there not more criticism on that?
I think this is a really, really tense question. A very important question as well. So one reason why we set up this project is exactly this, because let's maybe stick to my topic of voluntary return in this. It is still like somehow perceived as a very liberal practice, as like it is covered by a human rights approach, let's say. So, and I think in general, a lot of technologies which are operating within this frame of development aid, or let's say under the umbrella of fighting the cause of flight, has the same character. So I think, first of all, there's a lot of money spent on this, as we learned from Simone's input. And this is a reason as well, like you can really get a lot of funds. In our project, we had really problems to cooperate with different NGOs or international organizations, because they were not ready to talk openly with us about their experiences in such programs like voluntary return and reintegration, because they feared to lose these funds. So I think maybe just to give make it not too long and just give a short impression. And in general, I would say, like, I mean, we need, like, how we can overcome this was a part of your first question. And I think this is a really important question, but nearly impossible to solve. No, I mean, development aid had a base of like a human rights based focused policy, but the European Union is acting in a like concentrating on economical politics, their own interest, and like to really have a human rights based and solidaire practice, this would need to change. Development corporations is normally there to develop better living conditions in partnership. It was to focus also on the fight of poverty, for example, as one part, infrastructural programs, projects, and so on. But of course, we cannot reach this if we stick still to a restrictive migration border regime. So we need first to change, I think, how we deal with people arriving in Europe and Germany also, how to take care of people on the move. I mean, if we question if people are saved on their dangerous journey from Libya to Italy, or if not, we will not go one step further towards a human rights European policy, I would say. And this is what is happening. People are left to die in the Sahara, but also in the Mediterranean.
Yeah, that's also what one person from the audience says, due to the fact that most of the NGOs are always after the funding and take uncritically whatever they get without any political reflection. So perhaps we also need to be more clear by naming them also a complicit of all these developments we were discussing about. So I think yeah, perhaps we also need a civil society that is courageous enough to tell we don't want that and we are not going to be part of that. But yeah, to organize that will be a big challenge. There is another question or comment on voluntary return. So return is more or less an unending journey, the consequence of spatial politics, forced belonging, and wrong concept of home. In Lagos, reintegration program is used to remove the unwanted population from one's territory. There's another one saying that when you described the travel from refugees via Latin America to the US, so agree on this. Imagine there are even Cuban refugees arriving in Turkey recently. So it's really crazy. And I think that is all coming from our audience. So I will give you the chance to give a final statement before we close this webinar. So who wants to start by giving a final statement to the audience? Simona, you want to start?
Well, we predicted in 2015, as we started with the project, a lot of bad things and prayed it will not happen. And it happened all the way. And if I look at the pushbacks these days on all kinds of borders, I get so shocked that literally the worst case scenario which we draw was not as bad as it is now. The same for Africa. I mean, the refugee crisis does not stop here at all. I mean, we are sitting between Ethiopian, Eritrean refugees, Congolese, South Sudanese here in Uganda. We're all fucking squeezed. But nobody in Uganda says ever, don't let them come in. I mean, even during the Corona crisis, the Congolese refugees came and came and came in thousands a day. With Corona, everything. And the Ugandans never closed the border. Yeah, this is what makes me sometimes shocked, that we rich people in Europe, we can have all the money to close our borders, while the Africans among themselves have no means to survive and still are somehow human. And that is what shocks me sometimes. And when you confront the European Union act like politicians, human beings as well by themselves, Italians, Germans, whatever, who sit in Brussels, and you confront them with all that, then they say, but if we would not do this, the right wing people take over. And we do that to save our democracy in Europe. And then you think, what the fuck is going on in your minds? You predict something which might come in the future as the worst case scenario for Europe, meaning a millions of refugees from Africa and a right-wing Nazi kind of government. Well, then of course let the devil rule the world. Yeah, and if you go always the nightmare of scenario. So I think the European Union lost its credibility and legacy already in Africa. That is clear. Human rights, don't discuss that with the European ambassadors. Go home. That is what African dictators now say to the Europeans when they come at human rights. And then the same time is what happens, everybody goes to China. I mean, Africans have an option just to go away from it. Yeah, they don't need the development aid when China is just pouring out money in the continent. So I think the European Union loses its legacy in Africa totally, its political influence in terms of positive influence fully, and there is no way back. We ruined it so drastically that it's done. I mean, and what's the next step now? That's the question. I mean, development aid does not lead to any development. We figured that out. But if you use it to turn the way back, and migration is a way of development, and the Europeans don't understand that. Yet they travel themselves for refuge and migration all over the place. But that's my statement at the end.
Thank you, Simona. Nina?
Thank you as well. Yeah, maybe just on just 1 second back to the topic we had before on the international NGOs or development aid agencies. We talked about some of them also on our website, mostly about German corporations. So I think we named them. If you want to read about this in English, you can find it on our website, so not to take time now in this. And yeah, maybe then also I will have my final statement on my topic. So this, what we found out, as I said, is the successful reintegration is not achieved, and this is paid by development aid. And this reintegration programs, they are not only focusing on returnees, they are focusing as well on migrants in transit. For example, in Morocco, on people from Cameroon or from Senegal or other people who try to pass to Europe. This is the same case in other countries, in Egypt and Tunisia as well. Also for them to find, like, the official claim is to bring up a perspective, economical perspective for them then in Morocco. But how this is really a ridiculous, and let's just highlight this, a ridiculous claim in a country, also in other countries, Morocco just as an example, where there is no reception system, where there is no really a based system for people to stay and have papers for longer term. So how you can provide them a perspective then there. So at the end of this long journey of returnees, voluntary returnees, I mean, they are often really in worse situations in their countries where they came from in the beginning, and most of them, they are planning to leave again. So also these programs will never stop people from moving. They make them more suffering, yes, and this is what we and our allies, we all need to fight against. We also, this is also a reason why we also documented resistance to these programs. So we are sure that the desire and the right to live in security and dignity cannot be driven away. People need, we all need a right to stay and a right to leave. And I mean, this is not only for the other, this is for all of us. And me personally, I want to live in a society where we all have a right to stay. This is also not my society then, right? So I think this is my final statement.
Can I just add one sentence?
Mm-hmm.
I spoke to someone who didn't want to disclose the name about all this, but they said it was a Ugandan in the politics. And he said, look, why does the European Union not just put this 100 billion of euros they're investing on let's say on an aeroplane or a helicopter and throw that in $100 notes over Africa? I think they save migration 3 billion in short term. And I was laughing so much, but it's maybe true, you know?
But what a nice picture, really.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Now, as you know, so for all those who followed our series of lecture, we know that we are also discussing about naming what it is. There are crimes going on. Yeah. So the basic rights of refugees are violated systematically. That is what's going on. I thank you so much for describing what development aid is part of that, and I wish you good luck and everything for your future work, and we're very, very excited to see what you're going to do next. So wishes to Uganda and wishes to Berlin. Have a nice evening, everybody. And who wants to get in touch with the speakers, just write me an email and then I put you into contact. Okay, have a nice evening. Thank you so much. Bye.
Good. Now.